So before we get started, I think it's important to quickly establish a few things. Number one, if you can't tell by the title of the video, I'm going to be doing a lot of complaining, so if you don't like that sort of thing, goodbye. Number two, what is the old Zelda? The first two games are definitely the foundational titles, the ones that established key ideas, names, gameplay mechanics, and even music that would be iterated on in future entries. The third game, A Link to the Past, is the first game in the series to take all those ingredients and bake them into a perfect product. If you like to bake, you'll know that messing up the measurements of any of your ingredients can ruin the whole thing. It's not like cooking where you can just add more spices. The game beautifully alternates between guiding the player to their next main goal and also giving them the freedom to explore the world at their leisure, to discover optional secrets and shit. The game's a great difficulty too, which encourages the player to find some of the hidden stuff like the magic cape or the cane of Burna. This is also the only Zelda game where I actually hit up the potion shops and fill up my bottles, so I have a fighting chance in the dungeons. It's not too hard, but it's also not too easy. Link's Awakening does the same exact thing, except it's on the Game Boy, which can lead to some frustration with its lack of buttons. But the remake proves that the actual game design is just as perfect as its predecessor. Ocarina of Time takes those ideas and translates them into 3D with such elegance that you wonder if a time traveler went back to the mid-90s and helped them make the damn thing. The game is also much easier than the games before it. Link can now take a quarter heart of damage. This easier difficulty takes away some of the player's encouragement to find those secrets like in A Link to the Past. But again, the game does an amazing job at establishing a rhythm. The player never feels stuck doing the main story. They can almost always just go screw off and explore the overworld, play mini games, or find hidden stuff. And this is, if we're being honest, when things become harder to categorize. Majora's Mask is old Zelda, but the time mechanic makes it its own thing for the better. So I would call it old Zelda asterisk, the asterisk meaning but a little different. The Oracle games, absolutely old Zelda. The multiplayer games don't pertain to what this video is about, so I won't be talking about them much anymore. Wind Waker is old Zelda. It's just hard to recognize at first because the game has a drastically different setting than the rest of the series. It does open up with about an hour of linearity, but after that it usually lets the player just explore the seas and find new islands and whatever treasures they hold. Or they can just keep sailing to the next story destination and keep the game feeling pretty linear. Again, it's that player freedom mixed with always being an arm's length away from the main story that's of key importance here. Minish Cap is old Zelda. Twilight Princess I don't really know how to categorize. It's the first game in the series to have truly awful pacing, forcing the player to do shit that isn't fun at all. But if you can get past those parts, the dungeon design is excellent and the items you unlock encourage more exploration. Zelda games usually don't have such awfully restricting pacing. Usually you never feel that far away from some freedom, but this is the only game in the series I play where I go, okay, I just gotta get over this next hour and a half of bullshit before I can have fun again. But again, peak 3D dungeon design. The DS games are old Zelda, they just play like dog shit. I'm sure if they got remakes too, that would be pretty good. That brings us to Skyward Sword, a game I used to hate, but now I love with all my heart thanks to the Switch port. The pacing is better than Twilight Princess's, but the map is segmented into different little regions. And instead of these regions feeling like an overworld, they sometimes feel like dungeons themselves, which can be kind of cool. There's puzzles and trinkets scattered around, and there's never anything that resembles a big open field like the other games. It's definitely a different feeling than the older games, but much like Majora's Mask, this is what I would call old Zelda asterisk, the asterisk meaning, but a little different. And the same would go for A Link Between Worlds, which is a freaking amazing game. But this time around, all the important items can be rented from the start, and the items you find in dungeons are, with rare exception, not connected to more overworld exploration. They were also encouraging a lot of non-linearity with letting the player choose what order to play the dungeons in. Mostly. A Link Between Worlds is again what I would call old Zelda asterisk. And then finally, we get to the games that ruined one of my favorite things in the whole wide world, the Legend of Zelda series. How's that for a video intro? Before anyone tells me, Dylan, this series is almost 40 years old, it needed a change, the series was always changing. You have your traditional ones, you have your one all about time management, you have the one where you sail a giant ocean and feel like a pirate. Even before Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, there were Zelda fans who loved certain games and hated other games. That's how different they were. That's how much the series kept changing. People like to call these things gimmicks to downplay them, but those are fundamental changes. I could call the open world design a gimmick, but I won't because that's stupid. Look, I don't hate these games at all. I just put that in the title because I thought it would be funny. Tears of the Kingdom especially had some pretty mind-blowing gameplay mechanics and puzzles, but it's like when you get home and your mom said she made brownies and she put a shit ton of peanuts or like bugles in them. I feel like I gotta pick out the parts of the brownie that I actually like and ignore the many pieces that I don't. I don't like getting almost all of your major puzzle solving tools at the beginning of the game. Instead of the core items you used to get in dungeons, you get all the stuff on your Sheikah slate within the intro. I really like knowing that the longer I spend with a Zelda game, the more I'm going to be rewarded with new important gameplay mechanics. But I never felt like that with these two games. I don't feel rewarded when I get a cool new weapon because, of course, it will eventually break. The clothes are, I guess, a reward, but that's not what I'm talking about either. It's clear after years of seeing these games resonate with people online that Breath and Tears really encourage player creativity and freedom. I'm seeing people build cool mechs and Evangelions and tanks and shit in Tears of the Kingdom, and that's awesome. I'm glad you're having fun, but we have to be honest, that's not Zelda. That was never Zelda. The most you'd see with player creativity like that in the old games is when people sequence break the dungeons, or trying to find ways to make the games as hard as possible, like a 3-heart challenge or using the broken giant's knife for as long as you can. I'm not against player freedom. I love it, but I think there's a difference between giving the player all the freedom and enough freedom. Enough freedom means that you never feel constrained by the game, but you also will inevitably hit a wall after a couple of hours where you need to do the next dungeon to get the new item to keep exploring. But when you get all the freedom, you really have no motivation to do the main story dungeons except to just see the story. I remember the first time I played Breath of the Wild, I honestly didn't feel like I made substantial progress until like 20 hours into the game. I would rather have spent those 20 hours overcoming trials and challenges that were presented to me in the order that the developers felt made the most sense. I know that people think it's like cool that you can beat Ganondorf immediately after the intro of Breath of the Wild, but then you never get that moment at the end where you're like, holy shit, I used to be this kid in green with a wooden shield and a butter knife, but look at me now. Part of what makes Stone Tower Temple feel so amazing is because it's the culmination of all your tools and skills. You have to use all 3 transformation masks along with your items like the hook shot and the Elegy of Emptiness. Just getting into Stone Tower Temple is extremely memorable. It's this triumphant moment of the game's design that says, okay, let's go all out. And I know a counter argument would be, well, by giving you all the tools in the beginning of the game, that means all the dungeons can go all out. And I guess that's kind of true. The Breath of the Wild dungeons were boring, but the Tears of the Kingdom ones were pretty good. My main problem with open world game design is game flow, which is what I would define as what a player is typically doing in a normal play session. And it was clear to me when I completed a dungeon in Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild that I would have to spend hours and hours exploring the world just to grind up more hearts, stamina, and unlock more map towers like it's fucking Far Cry now. And I know what you're gonna say, oh boo-hoo, you're just complaining that you have to play more of the game. But there are many play sessions with these games where if you sit down and play them for an hour, give or take, you feel like you achieved almost nothing, which isn't fun. Okay, so I just wanted to see if maybe drawing this out, I could explain it a little bit better. The red squares are the beginning and the end of Zelda games. Usually in the beginning of a Zelda game, you are funneled directly into the first dungeon. Now I said usually, obviously there are certain exceptions like Zelda 1 or Zelda 2. The blue circles are the dungeons. After the player completes a dungeon, they have multiple paths ahead of them, and you can do whatever you want within certain restrictions. You got a new item here, right? So now you can explore and get a new heart piece. Now you can find a new weird NPC with a new minigame or side quest. Now you can find some hidden rupees or something. Then you get to your next dungeon, and look, more paths, because now you have more items. Next dungeon, more items, more secrets, more NPCs, more side quests, more heart pieces, more treasures, optional items too. And the same thing repeats, more paths, more paths, more paths, and eventually you do get to the final dungeon and the end of the game. And what's beautiful about this is that some people will just take this straight line all the way through to the end of the game. I forgot the straight line here. But some people will just burn through the game and they'll miss out on all of this. They'll miss out on the secrets. They'll miss out on the 3 spells that you get in Ocarina of Time from the Great Fairies. Or you can do everything. Or you can pick and choose and you'll be like, I'm gonna take these 2 paths. I'll take these 3 paths. I'll take these 2 paths. The pick and choose nature is just so much fun. Okay, so we're gonna do the same thing with the new Zelda games. Remember, the red squares at the beginning and the end, the green paths are the options the player can take, and the blue circles are the dungeons. This is what we've got. This is how it feels to play the new Zelda games. And if you do want more health or stamina, that means you have to interact with one of my least favorite things in these games, the shrines. I'm sorry. No, you know what? I'm not sorry. The shrines are boring. They look boring. They sound boring. A lot of them reuse ideas or just give the freaking orb to you. They have good puzzles sometimes, but they just come off as so boring. Nintendo wants every player of these new Zelda games to feel like they had a different experience than everybody else. I mean, listen, Aonuma said it himself.
We've created a game where each player's experience will be different.
I just miss that specifically tailored feeling of the old games. And while I do think there are huge flaws with these new games like pacing, game flow, and the shrines, honestly, as I'm reading this, I admit that these games aren't bad, they're just not for me. A lot of long-running series go through transitional periods. Resident Evil 4 brought the series to a more action-packed direction, which they eventually tried to undo with 7. Symphony of the Night turned 2D linear action platformers into big open Metroidvanias. God of War went from a more arcadey feeling hack and slash game to a worse and more boring The Last of Us. And honestly, none of those really affected me, but this one does. I feel like I've been left behind. Old Zelda was really special and hard to replicate. If you Google games like Zelda, you get the same answers every time. Alundra, a game from 27 years ago. Anodyne, Blossom Tales, It'll Do. If the old Zelda games weren't as special as I'm making them out to be, where are the replicas? Where are the copycats? There's 8 billion Metroidvanias and Souls-like, so what's up? Shout out to Tunic though, that game was great. And you know what? Also, shout out to Echoes of Wisdom. That game looks awesome, it looks very puzzle focused, I'm excited for it. But even that announcement trailer proved to me that all old Zelda fans like me can expect now is 2D games and remakes. That's it. I highly doubt after selling 10 million copies in 3 days that we're ever going to get a big 3D Zelda game that feels like the old games. The last thing I want to say is, these games absolutely deserve to exist. They are great video games. But you can't change my mind that it should have been a new IP, a new franchise, a new series, open world, heavy dependence on physics, whatever the fuck these cutscenes are.
I should thank you now that my spirit is free. This
isn't Zelda. It was never Zelda. They just slapped a name on it to sell more copies. There was just a specific language that the design of these old games spoke, and if you played 1 or 2 of them, you would speak that language, and it was super rewarding. And when I play these new games, I don't feel that language in any of the game's design. It is what it is. If you want to call me a hater or just like somebody who can't get over nostalgia, whatever. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you're okay. I hope you're all having a great day. Have a great week. Thanks. I miss the old Zelda, had overworld Zelda, chop up some grass Zelda, the more linear Zelda. I hate the new Zelda, the open world Zelda, the boring shrine Zelda, the cringy cussing Zelda. I miss the sweet Zelda, actual dungeon Zelda. I gotta say, at that time I'd like to play Zelda. See, I adored Zelda. There weren't many Zeldas, and now I look around, there aren't any Zeldas. I used to love Zelda. I even had the green tunic. I thought I was Zelda. What if I made a video about Zelda called I Miss the Old Zelda? Man, that'd be so Zelda. That's all it was, Zelda. I still miss Zelda, and I hate you like Nintendo hates Zelda.